Almost everything you think you know about Attack on Titan is based on lies. Attack on Titan's ending is a cruel joke, written by a teacher who prefers his lessons learned the hard way. This is by no means a genuine conclusion to the story, but the product of a frustrated author who decided to deconstruct his own work as a way to address his audience's continuous refusal to approach the narrative beyond its face value. In an ironic twist of fate, the audience of a story that taught us to always be critical of powerful narratives became everything this story rebels against, when we collectively failed to question many of the outrageous or inconsistent developments that took place in Attack on Titan's final seasons. Our collective display of ignorance regarding the main character's rapidly changing personality and motivations led the author to write an inversion of his own story, as far removed from how he originally intended to conclude his life's work as possible. But what if I tell you that the elements comprising Isayama's true ending have been waiting to be uncovered for many years now, in the form of clues that were hidden in plain sight throughout the story, and that we might actually still see a mind-blowing conclusion with plot twists that make the basement reveal feel like child's play? Eren never turned dark. The deterministic timeline is a lie, and the rumbling isn't what you think it is. This video proposes a secret endgame, which has been centered around the termination of Titan powers since way before the start of the main character's journey, while occasionally providing commentary on the false aspects of the story's current conclusion. Did you know that Karl Fritz, the 145th king of Eldia, wasn't the cowardly pacifist idiot we see him for, but a wise king who devoted himself to the creation of a conflict that would rid the world of Titan powers while liberating his people from their oppressor? Upon gaining knowledge of a future which saw the demise of his people, Karl Fritz began to pave the way towards a century-long plan to terminate the Titan curse, and nearly every character in the story is involved in it, in one way or the other. A complicated endeavor, Karl Fritz intended to stage a conflict that would push Ymir Fritz into finally letting go of the Titan curse, But the founder wasn't allowed to take heed of this, for the plan would fail the minute she realized that someone was aiming to release her from her one and only duty. Portrayed as a pacifist with suicidal intentions, Karl Fritz's presumed stupidity is the reason why our characters suffer in the ways they do. For the next few minutes, I will be highlighting a number of panels, clips, and screenshots in order to uncover the secret truths behind the 145th King's broken ideology and contradictory actions. Up until its final 2 episodes, Attack on Titan was building up towards a number of plot twists, most of them connected to the idea that Karl Fritz was much more than what we were made to believe.
始祖の巨人を継承すると同時にタイバー家と画策し、一人のマーレ人を英雄と称し活躍させました。名はヘイロス。そしてできる限りのエルディア国民を島に移し、壁の門を閉ざしました。その際、安息を脅かせば幾千の巨人で報復すると言い残しました。しかし、これは真意ではありません。フリッツ王は自らの思想を引き継がせるため、不戦の契りを生み出しました。これにより、カール・フリッツの思想は代々受け継がれ、今日まで島から巨人が攻めてくることはなかったのです。つまり、世界を守っていたのは、我々が忌むべき壁の王だと思っていたカール・フリッツの平和を願う心なのです。彼の目的は平和です。後にマーレが力をつけ、王家の命や始祖の巨人を奪おうとするなら、それを受け入れる。それほどまでにエルディア人の犯した罪は重く、決して償うことはできない。ただし、いずれ報復を受けるまでの間、壁の中の世界に争いのない束の間の楽園を享受したい。どうかそれだけは許してほしい。
One thing Willy Tybur failed to mention during his speech about Karl Fritz's ideology is the fact that the 145th King of Eldia actually collaborated with the nation of Marley upon making his scheme with the Tybur family. Given the fact that Marley is ruled by the Tybur family, Karl technically collaborated with his enemy, who in turn proceeded to attack the very nation they conspired with, at a time when the king's peaceful ideology still ruled. Karl Fritz's collaboration with the rulers of Marley allowed Eldia's imperialism to continue at the hands of a new oppressor, a fact which renders Willy's speech about their pacifist intentions completely obsolete. A plan that makes less and less sense the more you think about it. We might one day learn that it was actually their intention to save the people of Paradis by shifting the blame onto a new oppressor and staging the conflict required to rid the world of Titan powers. Pacifist cowards don't usually engage in the creation of weapons of mass destruction. And if Karl was genuinely keen on having his home destroyed, his decision to build 3 highly dangerous walls, which protect the island from multiple attacks, is a rather strange one. And what about Willy? How smart was it to announce a destined-to-fail attack on the one nation in the world that possessed weapons of mass destruction, while committing suicide in the process of it? The fateful mission this supposedly intelligent man spoke of. Did it amount to a stupid, genocidal attack on an enemy capable of destroying entire continents? Or was there more to it than that? Is it a mere coincidence that Willy Tybur rendered it into a piece of cake for Eren to destroy the island's enemies by grouping together the world's allied forces Or is this all part of a calculated plan to save Paradise, while terminating the Titan curse in the process of it? And what about Willy's sister, Lara Tybur? Did she deliberately stall her fight against Eren, losing it intentionally so that Eren could gain the power of the Warhammer Titan, along with memories that contained knowledge of a century-long plan to save the island? If you ask me, both Willy and his sister were no less than allies of Paradis, who worked according to Karl Fritz's plan to terminate the Titan curse. And they most likely weren't alone in their role.
Okina.
お前たちも飛行船を見に来たのか。
はい。
レベリオ収容区のものだな。外出許可証を見せろ。
持ってません。
無許可で市内に入ったんだな。どうなるか分かっているな。
はい。
労働か制裁か。
制裁を。
兄さん。おお、親に迷惑はかけたくないか。
はい。僕が妹を無理やり連れ出しました。妹の分も僕に制裁をください。
分かった。もう一発だ。まったく容赦ねえな、クルーが。ほら、ジョーちゃんは先に帰ろうね。腕章を外さなかったことは賢い。たとえガキでも腕章を外したエルディア人は楽園送りだからな。
もう帰ります。
待て。飛行船を見に来たんだろ。せっかくだから見ていけよ。
Eren Kruger was an agent who worked in favor of Karl Fritz's colossal plan to terminate the Titan curse. That might sound like a wild statement, but for someone as crucial as Kruger, it's a little odd that we never learn how or why he inherited the attack Titan, nor do we know who gave this mysterious man his job. Upon examining Kruger's connections, I realized that his unarticulated mysteries are easily solved, but only when one acknowledges the existence of a secret plot that has been brewing in the shadows of attack on Titan's history. Given that he was affiliated with Dinah, Kruger clearly possessed connections to a rebellious branch of the royal family that stayed behind on the continent when Karl fled with part of his people to Paradis Island. This underexposed branch, why didn't Karl Fritz manipulate them back into obeying his supposedly stupid plan the minute they decided to disobey him? Did he intentionally allow for such a rebellion to happen because he secretly desired his people to be liberated? Or are we looking at a mere plot hole? I believe that many of the story's inconsistencies can be worked out when we approach them as parts of a deliberate plan. And if this holds up, Kruger will turn out to be an individual who worked towards the termination of Titan powers, instead of the Eldian restorationist we believed him to be. A visual clue that points to Kruger's true motivations can be found in the cross-shaped cuts worn by members of the Restorationist movement, an organization which was founded by none other than Kruger himself. Upon first glance, these cross-shaped cuts might appear to be meaningless, But after I stumbled on the same symbol in the ending visuals of Attack on Titan's second season, I realized that it signifies the termination of the Titan curse, which is exactly what I believe that Kruger's true motivations amount to. Another interesting thing about Kruger is the possibility that he was collaborating with Tom Xaver, the inheritor of the Beast Titan, and a man who is supposed to be working for the enemy. Kruger's description of an Eldian doctor who posed as a Marleyan citizen fits the way Xaver describes himself, and it could hint towards a currently unrevealed connection between the two. If it's true that Karl Fritz aimed to stage a conflict that would rid the world of Titan powers, it would likely mean that he had agents working for both Eldia and Marley. Were these two working towards the same objective? Or is it another coincidence that Xaver's decision to convince Zeke to snitch on his parents ended up accelerating Kruger's plan to give the Attack Titan to Grisha? This is merely the tip of the iceberg of Attack on Titan's currently unrealized endgame, as there are many plot twists left to uncover.
すごいよヒストリア。もうこんなに読めるようになるなんて。だってお姉ちゃんが教えてくれるから。あ、ダメだよ鼻水垂らしてちゃ。ヒストリアはもうちょっと女の子らしくしないと。はい噛んで。お、はい、よくできました。ねえ、女の子らしくって何？そうだね。女の子らしくっていうのはこの子みたいな女の子のことかな。クリスタ？そう、ヒストリアもクリスタが好きでしょ。クリスタはいつも他の人を思いやっている優しい子だからね。ヒストリアもこの子みたいになってね。この世界は辛くて厳しいことばかりだから、みんなから愛される人になって助け合いながら生きていかなきゃいけないんだよ。じゃあ私お姉ちゃんみたいになりたい。え？私大きくなったらお姉ちゃんみたいになれるかな。いいよ、いいよ、いいよ、そのままでいいよ。
Just like Willy and Kruger, Frieda Reiss was most likely a participant in Karl Fritz's gigantic plan to terminate the Titan curse and save the island. However, before we get to this, we must first go back to the year 2018, during which Isayama teased a draft of what he claimed to be Attack on Titan's final panel, depicting an unidentified man who uttered the words, "You are free," to a newly born baby. This is where things get tricky, because even though the fake ending was designed to make you believe otherwise, the unidentified man depicted in the original final panel is none other than Eren Jaeger, holding in his arms the reincarnated soul of Ymir Fritz, finally released from the burden of keeping alive the Titan curse. And although I don't actually believe that Eren is the father of this child, it should be obvious that the mother is Historia Reiss, who has been groomed by Frieda to take a liking to the Founder, in order to one day fulfill the role of offering the Founder a way out of the Path's dimension by giving birth to Ymir's reincarnated self. This might sound like a gruesomely heavy burden to deal with, and it probably is, but given Historia's personal desires to care for those who are deemed worthless, it makes sense that the Queen of Paradise Island would genuinely wish to nurture a tormented soul like Ymir. Visiting her younger sister in secret, in order to accustom her to none other than the founder, Frieda prepared Historia for her eventual role as the mother of Ymir's reincarnated soul. An essential component of Attack on Titan's unarticulated mysteries, Frieda's mysterious behavior seems to fit the story's unsolved puzzle perfectly when we start to consider the existence of a shadow plan which has been active throughout the entire story. What's more is that even their father didn't know about Frieda's visits to her younger sister, which makes it all the more likely that there is something suspicious going on here. As is usually the case with this story, lazily written reasons for fishy elements point to the presence of bigger truths, a fact which renders Rod's explanation into a clue towards the suspicious nature of Frieda's visits. Sad that she had to groom her sister into carrying such a heavy burden, Frieda did what she was instructed to do, and there happen to be even more clues that point to this currently unrevealed aspect of the story. Take, for example, Rod's sudden and unexplained change of mind regarding the fate of his daughter. Without possessing any knowledge of Frieda's secret teachings, Rod decided to name Historia after a book's depiction of none other than the founder herself, an element of mystery which remains unexplained to this very day. Given Rod's robotic change of nature, was he perhaps commanded to rename his daughter after a book's depiction of the founder? I personally believe that the parallels between Ymir and Historia are deeper than mere illustrations of the story's themes, and find it likely that the latter's life path was partially designed in order to bring her closer to the founder, in preparation of a grand plan to terminate the Titan curse. In order to complete her participation in the plan to bring this cursed history to an end, Frieda Reiss was instructed to lose against an outsider, which allowed a revolution to rise up within the walls. Grossly out of character, Frieda seems to get extremely pissed at the innocent Grisha Jaeger when he begs her to end the conflict, which suggests that she was required to provoke him into transforming. Those eager to hear about my opinion on Eren's involvement in this infamous confrontation will have to wait a little longer, as it will be analyzed much deeper into this video. Anyway, Frieda's founder was obliterated by Grisha's very inexperienced Titan with ease, and anyone who believes that this was due to the vow against war should remind themselves that Karl Fritz's supposed pacifistic programming should have enabled Frieda to defeat any dangerous individual who intended to disrupt the royal family's contradictory idea of peace. Not to mention how easy it is to debunk Rod's claim that Frieda lost due to inexperience, the moment one considers the fact that Grisha wasn't allowed to transform during all those years he spent on Paradise. It gets even better, because Grisha's purple eyes as depicted in this screenshot from the 43rd episode clearly hint towards the idea that he was possessed by Karl's will right before he killed the entire Reiss family. The 80th episode repeats this very same pattern, indicating that Grisha was programmed by Karl Fritz in order to kill the entire Reiss family, successfully creating the means for a rebellion that would greatly improve the prospects of Paradis Island's survival. No scheme is devious enough when your plan is to end a historical conflict as complicated as this one. And with that said, let us move on to the next part, in which I'll discuss the exact methods required to liberate Ymir Fritz from her confinement. At the climax of Ymir Fritz's backstory, one that is marked by a level of injustice and trauma so bad that it rendered the founder incapable of approaching herself as a person with thoughts and needs of her own. It is none other than Eren who furiously denies the cruel king's commands to the innocent child, almost as if attempting to undo her from her barbaric programming. In other words, it is almost as if Eren is no less than Ymir's therapist, his true goals being to release the founder from her shackles by making her unleash the rumbling in order to confront her with its violence, as a way to push her into terminating the Titan curse forever. This complicated endeavor is meant to parallel Ymir's first violation of her oppressor's authority, in which she was punished for saving one of the king's pigs from slaughter. An act of empathy which resulted in the cruelest of punishments imaginable. Ymir Fritz was robbed of her sense of self when the king punished her for doing a good deed. As a result of this, Ymir's personality traits, needs, desires, agency, sense of self, and individual thoughts have been buried under layers of trauma and negative conditioning for trillions of years. Escaping death by fatefully stumbling on the power of the Titans, this vulnerable child was made into her abuser's personal tool for war, and her ability to express freedom was lost in the process of it. What's more is that after being punished for violating the king's authority for the first time, Ymir's agency was once again cruelly denied the moment she decided to escape her misery in an understandable attempt to exit life itself. Arguably the cruelest thing that has ever happened in this story, Ymir was robbed even of the agency to die, as her failure to commit suicide confined her to the king's programming for an eternity. Needless to say, Ymir didn't love King Fritz, and the sooner we realize that Isayama inserted Stockholm Syndrome into the story to parallel his audience's tendency to put up with the author's abusively manipulative writing, the better. Eren is providing Ymir with shock therapy, and by unleashing the rumbling, he's setting the stage to push the founder into replicating her first two violations of the king's authority. The first goal is to reawaken Ymir's long-lost sense of empathy by confronting her with the violence she's enabling, in order to make sure that she ends the rumbling through the termination of the Titan curse before its destruction reaches beyond the borders of Marley. I will dive deeper into the true nature of Eren's goals in the next section, but I first have to make clear that the execution of a worldwide rumbling was never part of our protagonist's actual objectives, and that the desired survival of Paradise Island depends on the combined gamble of terminating Marley as well as the Titan curse in one go. The second objective, which happens to be a natural consequence of the first objective, is to replicate Ymir's attempted and final violation of the cruel king's authority by allowing the founder to end her own life along with the path's dimension, successfully terminating the Titan curse as the result of this. Anger is only the first step in overcoming the wounds abusers unjustly inflict on their victims, and anyone who believes Eren freed Ymir simply by making her obey himself instead of someone else is completely missing the unsubtle points of this story. By the way, did you know that killing Zeke shouldn't have stopped the rumbling in the first place, as it would merely rob Eren of the Founder's control over the Wall Titans, triggering the eternal horrors of a mindless rumbling on an immediate basis? As illustrated by Pastor Nick upon uncovering the first Wall Titan revealed in the story, Wall Titans are in fact mindless Titans, and exposing them to sunlight will cause them to move independently from the Founder's control. Not only was the first Wall Titan we ever saw perfectly awake and able to move its eyes upon being exposed to sunlight, Pastor Nick's urgent requests to cover it up were clearly written with the intention to illustrate the dangers of a mindless rumbling. As depicted throughout the story, it's practically impossible to undo the process of Titanization, and the only logical way to perform such a feat would be to go through with the extremely difficult task to push Ymir Fritz into undoing the programming that was etched into her psyche as if it was some sort of a natural law.
君と焦燥感を共にしたつもりだった。でも、君がなぜ単独行動に出て、この島を危機に追い込んだのかがわからない。もう、ヒストリアはどうなってもよかったのかい？
俺は潜水の巨人を食いました。
え？
この巨人の能力は、地面から自在に硬質化を操り、武器でも何でも生み出せるわけです。つまり、どれだけ深く固い地下に俺を幽閉しても無駄だってことです。俺はいつでも好きな時にここを出られる。当然質を持つ俺を殺すこともできない。いくら脅したところでジークを殺すわけにもいかない。つまり、ハンジさん、あなたに何ができるって言うんですか？教えてくださいよ、ハンジさん。他のやり方があったら、教えてくださいよ。
エレンのエッチ！未だに反抗期かよ！バカ！若者！
If we ever get to see the release of Attack on Titan's true ending, it will undoubtedly reveal to us that Eren didn't go as dark as we were made to believe, but that he somehow manipulated his own memories and behavior in order to create a puppet-like version of himself, with the aim of convincing the all-seeing but easily exploitable Ymir Fritz that he wasn't attempting to terminate the Titan curse. This is exactly what happened during the scene in which he shouted at Hanji, generating electricity and displaying titanization marks without being wounded, while shifting from the highly emotional and fired-up Eren into a much colder, uncharacteristic version of himself. This is where Eren transformed into an unrecognizable and incomplete version of himself, as a way to conceal his true goals from the Founder, and I will attempt to illustrate this concept by pointing to a number of scenes from both the source material as well as its animated adaptation. Do you remember how, after a time skip of nearly 4 years, Eren Jaeger was reintroduced into the story as a young man who, despite his trauma, managed to retain his inner light by growing beyond the dangers of nihilism? Despite being in the possession of knowledge about an upcoming catastrophe, Eren spoke openly about mental health and about the importance of hope. But for some reason, the author never depicted this version of our protagonist again after his return to Paradise. For no good reason, Eren went from a traumatized and burdened man who was able to retain his fire to a disengaged and cold sociopath. And the fact that we thoughtlessly hopped on the bandwagon instead of questioning the ridiculousness of this change is most likely what triggered Isayama to troll us by turning his protagonist into a weak-minded idiot. What happened to the man who treated his enemies with empathy? The man who moved beyond vengeance when he realized that the outside world was inhabited by more than just enemies? Where did he go? A hard-to-swallow truth for most people, Eren Jaeger concealed his true goals from Ymir Fritz by manipulating himself into becoming everything his character arc rebelled against. And part of the reason why this was so effective is because he actually convinced himself to believe that he's someone who intends to destroy the entire world. In a story that notoriously subverted one popular storytelling trope after the other, since when did it become a thing for characters to regress from wise young men into Saturday morning cartoon villains who theatrically announce their evil plans to the world before putting them in motion? Ymir is watching, and since she isn't allowed to find out that certain people are aiming to push her into doing the one thing she's prohibited from doing, Eren had to manipulate his memories and behavior in order to convince himself that he wants to destroy the entire world. To push Ymir into terminating the Titan curse before the rumbling reaches beyond the borders of Marley, Eren must play a dangerous game which risks the safety of the entire world. And the more he manages to scare the founder, the better. By the way, it actually isn't such a revolutionary idea that the founder is keeping a watchful eye on Eren, as she was already spotted peeking into Zeke's memories shortly after the explosion of a thunder spear caused him to nearly die. The 130th chapter, which contains flashbacks of an evil Eren that become irrelevant when we compare it to his character development in Marley, is actually filled with subtle clues indicating that our protagonist's memories are being gazed through by an anonymous entity. For a chapter that was received as the ultimate evidence to Eren's evil nature, Isayama's decision to occasionally omit the facial expressions of his story's protagonist is suspicious to say the least. Famous for his ability to draw highly complicated facial expressions that are brimming with nuance and emotion, why did the author of Attack on Titan frame Eren from such mysterious angles? Why does it feel like Eren is being spied on by an ominous presence? Contrary to most people's beliefs, Eren never actually turned over to the dark side, nor is he the idiot others want him to be. The man who was once able to grow beyond his depression after hearing a simple story of his mother is doing everything he can to bring this conflict to a somewhat desirable ending. And although I wouldn't exactly call him an agent of Karl Fritz's plan to terminate the Titan curse, he most likely did become its final player.
ない
要するに
違う私は
本来の自分を失いただ命令に従うためだけに作られた一族、つまりは奴隷だ。
やめろエレン。
俺がこの世で一番嫌いなものがわかるか。不自由な奴だよ、もしくは家畜だ。エレン！そいつを見ただけでムカムカしてしょうがなかった。その理由がやっとわかったよ。何の疑問も抱かずただ命令に従うだけの奴隷が見るに耐えなかった。俺はガキの頃からずっとミカサ、お前が大嫌いだった。
よくもミカサ！ミカサ。
Even though the fake ending convinced us of the idea that Eren staged the infamous table scene in a cliched attempt to distance himself from his closest friends, the scene's true nature has been waiting to be uncovered for years now. A statement which will be dissected during some of the upcoming parts of this video. I have come to approach this scene as a gigantic farce that was originally designed to render the all-seeing but easily exploitable Ymir Fritz uninterested in Mikasa Ackerman. One of Attack on Titan's best kept secrets, Mikasa holds within herself subconscious memories of past iterations of the story's timeline, and was painted as an entirely insignificant being by Eren in order to prevent Ymir from finding out about this. The plan to terminate the Titan curse spans no less than an entire century of work that was conducted during many previously failed iterations of the timeline. Secrets which are buried deep within the subconscious of Mikasa Ackerman, and which must be kept away from the founder as much as possible. I promise to slowly unravel these concepts in detail during a few of the next parts of this video. But for now, let's just say that the information presented in the story's fake ending couldn't be further removed from the truth, and that the all-seeing but ill-informed Ymir is wholly obliged to remain ignorant about Mikasa's secrets. By painting the highly important Mikasa as a slave, with no significance and no will of her own, Eren succeeded in keeping the founder's gaze away from his friend, and although she remains an omnipotent being, Ymir Fritz isn't the kind of person who's able to see through such an obvious lie on her own. And while he does everything to render Mikasa insignificant in the eyes of Ymir, Eren is also implicitly preparing the all-seeing founder to liberate herself by stating that it isn't okay to be a slave. This scene is a massive stage play with Ymir as its intended audience, and it simply happens to be too calculated, too well staged, and too perfect for it to be an act of desperation from the side of Eren. Not to mention that Eren managed to falsely paint Mikasa's headaches as a byproduct of her slave-like insignificance, even though his resourceful brother already denied it on the spot when Eren asked about it. Calm and collected, Eren Jaeger asked his brother about it in order to give off the impression that he truly believes Mikasa to be a slave with no significance or will of her own. Ymir is watching, and in order for Eren's farce to succeed, Zeke's answer doesn't matter at all. As long as Eren himself appears convinced, the founder will believe that Mikasa isn't worth checking out. Eren's farce didn't stop here, though, because in order to truly divert Ymir's gaze away from Mikasa, he needed to add an extra layer to it. Question: why does Mikasa slam Armin onto the table? And why does it seem to happen outside of her own will, when we already know that the supposed Ackerman is false? Answer: in order to make the supposed Ackerman, as well as Mikasa's slave-like insignificance truly convincing, Eren manipulated her into slamming their friend Armin onto the table. Mikasa's slam clearly happened outside of her own will, a fact which quietly suggests that the Ackerman family's immunity to mind control has been a massive lie ever since it was inserted into the story, designed to make sure that no person ever suspects an Ackerman of suspicious behavior. A quote taken from the very same chapter in which Mikasa slammed Armin onto the table outside of her own will. Hanji illustrates a perfect analogy of Isayama's storytelling. We've never seen the Ackerman's supposed immunity to mind control on panel. It has never been an active factor in the plot, and we have nothing that proves it. Earlier in the story, Mikasa couldn't give a damn about Eren and Jean beating each other into oblivion, which further indicates that her uncharacteristic actions during the infamous table scene were those of someone who was controlled in order to convince a passive observer about her insignificance. What's more is that to make his farce work, Eren was required to manipulate the peaceful Armin as well. This scene is either a pile of garbage which exposes the author's incompetence, or there simply happens to be an unrevealed aspect to it. And to make things worse, the most peaceful character in the entire show punched Eren in the face, even though he easily debunked his lies on the very same day, which prompts me to believe that there is much more at play here than we were initially made to believe. While I don't exactly know how, Eren somehow unlocked the ability to freely use some of the Founding Titan's abilities in a discreet manner, and I'm not counting out the possibility that his friends helped him with his plans during a previously failed iteration of the timeline. Which, by the way, I am going to start discussing now.
グリシャは確かに始祖を奪い、この一家を虐殺したはずだ。過去が変わるわけがない。
何をやってるフリーダ！早くその男を殺せ！始祖は無敵だ！そいつを殺せ！
もうその男を生かしておくわけにはいかないよ！早く殺してよ、姉さん！
私たちの楽園が壊されちゃう！フリーダ、みんなを守って！
姉さん！
フリーダ！
何をしてる？立てよ、父さん。忘れたのか？何をしにここに来たのか。
Eren's actions at the Rice Cavern are widely regarded among the biggest plot twists in anime. But what most people don't realize is that this scene will soon come to be known as an unbelievably clever deception, in which the protagonist created the illusion of a predetermined timeline by making it appear as if he had always been the one behind it all. Hidden in plain sight in the craftiest way imaginable, the first version of the cavern scene showed us how the usually calm Frieda provoked the innocent Grisha into transforming, and for some reason, the author carefully omitted this prominent detail during the scene's second version. What's more is that during the scene's first version, Grisha transformed while standing extremely close to the family, and without warning at that, as he didn't give the family any time to run, like he did during the scene's second iteration. However, the second time we get to see Grisha's confrontation with Frieda, some of its details were changed explicitly, and even though we all believed this scene to be part of a deterministic paradox, these not-so-subtle changes were in fact the byproducts of Eren's interference. Frieda originally allowed herself to get eaten by Grisha without the interference of Eren, and while it resulted in one of the easiest and most brutal victories Attack on Titan has ever seen, our protagonist was left with some pretty good reasons to tweak this scene to his own benefit. Another carefully concealed secret, which I'll be illustrating in the next few parts of this video. The story we've been following for years has always been the result of a very large number of failed iterations of the timeline, a fact that was obscured by Eren when he decided to interfere in his father's standoff with Frieda, halting their original confrontation in order to create the illusion that he was the one behind it all, tricking none other than Ymir Fritz into believing that their universe's history is set in stone. You most likely think that this sounds like a bunch of horse crap, but patience is key. So let's just start this analysis off by noting how Frieda is clearly looking into the direction of Eren the moment he and Zeke enter the Rice Cavern during the scene's notorious second portrayal. Next up, and this is where things get interesting. Although we were deceived into thinking that Eren was angry at his father's confrontation with Frieda, he actually happened to be in a deep state of focus, which enabled him to use his abilities to steer the scene towards his desired direction. While subjected to the influence of Eren's powers, Grisha blurts out information about the Attack Titan's abilities, and since this is a functional story that has traditionally refused to portray characters who theatrically describe their powers before their enemies, there has to be a hidden reason why Grisha does this. In order to convince passive observers such as Ymir and Zeke of the false idea that history is set in stone, Eren commands his father to spread misinformed ideas about the Attack Titan, while letting Frieda, who was instructed by Karl Fritz to lose against Grisha, know that he is doing the talking by walking towards her in an uncharacteristic and theatrical display of coolness. Many people have already wondered why an inheritor of the founding Titan didn't know about the Attack Titan's abilities, but it isn't that she doesn't know. Frieda simply happens to be confused by Grisha's uselessly misinformed description of the Attack Titan, a result of Eren's game of mind control, which wasn't part of the script Frieda was supposed to follow. Things start to change quite rapidly when, instead of being provoked by Frieda, to transform without warning, Grisha is controlled by Eren to announce his attack to the family he's about to kill. Attack on Titan is different from many other popular works of fiction because it never depicts characters who announce their attacks in theatrical fashion. Still, Grisha repeats the announcement of his attack while continuing to beat misinformed ideas about the story's time travel dynamic into the brains of every passive observer out there. Grisha's uncharacteristic speech causes the family to run away, a byproduct of Eren's interference that clearly didn't happen in the original version of the cavern scene. Grisha hesitates to perform his transformation, but instead of being relieved by this sudden development, Frieda starts to panic massively because she doesn't understand why her opponent has gone off script so severely. Zeke wonders out loud whether history has been altered, which is exactly what transpired here. But Eren is about to use Grisha's hesitation in order to make it appear as if it hasn't, changing history in such a crafty way that it creates the false impression that history is set in stone. Having altered the scene to the point that the confrontation got delayed, Eren has now set the stage to manipulate his father into transforming right after his hesitation. And by doing this, he convinces Zeke, Ymir, and everyone else of the false idea that he has always been the one behind it all, and that the future is set in stone by means of a predetermined paradox. A cool little detail that was added to the scene's animated adaptation. Frieda seems perfectly ready to transform in anticipation of Grisha's transformation, but pauses awkwardly when noticing that Grisha has halted his attack. Frieda is genuinely surprised by Grisha's hesitation to transform. Her body language lacks the urgency of someone who is taking part in an actual confrontation, and she even raises her eyebrow in response to the sudden fact that her opponent has went off script because of his son's mind control. By the way, the animated adaptation of this scene further hints towards a currently unrevealed aspect of Eren's actions by depicting Grisha to move in a puppet-like fashion, quietly indicating that he remains under the influence of his son's will, long after defeating Frieda, while continuously emitting steam from his body, which, even though he just exited his Titan, should only happen during the healing process of a shifter's wounds. Attack on Titan does not take place in a predetermined or fixed universe, but in a timeline that can be rewinded as many times as needed by sending memories into the past. And although we've been following the final result of a large number of previously overwritten iterations, Eren Jaeger has just convinced every passive observer of the idea that history is set in stone. At its earliest, the story's reset points likely go as far back as Karl Fritz's reign, and while we can't be sure how many checkpoints there are exactly, we can safely assume that Eren's dream in the first chapter is a subconscious one, whereas the throne room scene is a moment in which our protagonist consciously unlocks memories that are sent to him by his past future's self each time his mission fails.
俺人の親にはなれねえよ。
Yet another astonishing secret that is likely going to be revealed at some point in the future. Kenny Ackerman was chosen to make sure that the Titan syringe quietly ended up in the hands of the Survey Corps in order to successfully overwrite a previously failed iteration of the timeline where both Armin and Erwin had died. This involuntary role was unconsciously imposed on Kenny by none other than his friend Uri Reiss, an enigmatic successor of Karl Fritz, who somehow happened to be in the possession of knowledge about a tragic future. The actions and words of Uri do not make sense within the context of Karl Fritz's supposedly suicidal intentions, and his relationship with Kenny is filled with many details that point to the existence of an undiscovered plot shaped around the Titan syringe that ended up saving Armin. This undiscovered plot dates back to their very first encounter, during which Kenny shouted a number of the most violent and vengeful threats possible at Uri. A fact that will soon be undermined by Kenny's sudden and unexplained change of mind regarding his family's grudge. A mere moment after shouting hateful words at Uri, Kenny tells the audience that he doesn't remember caring about his family's grudge. And although we were told that it's not possible, this sudden development is the result of the founding Titan's ability to manipulate the memories and behavior of its subjects. Kenny was hacked in front of our very eyes to forget about his family's grudge, and the only reason Uri claimed to be incapable of performing such a feat on a descendant of the Ackermans is because the grand plan to terminate the Titan curse didn't allow him to spill the truth. Could it be that Uri Reiss bowed down to a violent man like Kenny Ackerman simply because he possessed the power to make sure that he wouldn't be killed by him? Not only did Kenny completely forget about his grudge, he also tells Uri that he wants to help him, even though he isn't supposed to know at all what his goals are. Not only did this scene quietly contradict the idea that the Ackermans are immune to mind control, it also contradicted the idea that the king sought to massacre the entire Ackerman family. What's more is that it made absolutely zero sense for Uri to spill the secrets of the Reiss family's inheritance ritual to a man like Kenny Ackerman, unless he was intentionally triggering his desire for power. To no one's surprise, Kenny Ackerman takes the bait, and as we all know, the only thing his quest for power resulted in was the Survey Corps' acquirement of the syringe that ended up saving Armin, successfully overwriting the timeline in which Armin and Erwin both died during the aftermath of the Shiganshina battle. A curious detail that was specifically added to the anime, Uri responded to Kenny's newly acquired interests with a calmly satisfied smile, almost as if he was content with the fact that everything was going according to the plan. And to add even more fuel to the fire, Kenny himself never actually believed in the Ackerman family's immunity to memory and mind control. Depicted immediately after he was told the presumed truth about their family's immunity to mind control, Kenny Ackerman approached his grandfather's history lesson with no less than caution. Almost as if to ridicule the information he had just received, Kenny proceeded to respond to his grandfather's speech with irony. The only reason Kenny chose to believe in the Ackerman family's immunity to mind control is because it would allow things to be more fun, which is quite easily the worst reason to take something for granted in a story as deceptively twisted as this one. However, the scene cuts to Kenny's realization that he won't be able to utilize the Founding Titan in the first place, and he now admittedly regrets believing in his family's immunity to mind control, as he wouldn't have been manipulated into chasing something so futile if he'd been more wary from the start. To those who are worried that these elements ruin Kenny's friendship with Yuri, it doesn't work like that at all. In fact, the beauty of their friendship is rooted in the idea that they were able to form such a genuine bond within such a devious context, since they only became friends as an unintentional byproduct of Yuri's task to manipulate Kenny. The mysteries of their bond continue to pile up on one another during Kenny's final moments, as he realizes something that is never explained to the audience. Just before handing Levi the syringe, did Kenny realize something about Yuri's desires which we aren't allowed to know yet? And whether his realizations were conscious or subconscious, Kenny completed his task after finding out something crucial about Yuri, as he handed Levi the syringe in an uncharacteristically purposeful and dramatic way, even though he couldn't give a crap about the Survey Corps during his entire arc. Whilst being subjected to influences he had little control over, Kenny Ackerman overwrote the timeline where both Armin and Erwin had perished. But it's only during the aftermath of Kenny's arc that these truths become fully visible. Did you know that in a blog post from 2016, Isayama mentioned that the scene we have just watched was heavily inspired by a video game that involves time travel? Let us take a brief moment to see what the author of Attack on Titan had to say about this video game, which features a protagonist who rewinds history in order to save her childhood friend from dying. In Life is Strange, the main character finds out that every time she rewinds time, her every choice affects her life in a butterfly effect. The unbearable losses and partings in our lives, its story is about whether or not we can accept them. Frankly, this month's chapter is greatly influenced by it. This may sound ridiculous now, but the reason why the author referred to a video game that involves time travel while talking about such a controversial event is because there have been 4 different iterations of the notorious battle for the syringe, with each new outcome overriding the previous one. As discussed previously, there has been an iteration that saw the deaths of both Armin and Erwin because there was no syringe to save either one of them, along with an iteration of the timeline where Levi, who had received the syringe from Kenny, ended up saving Armin because Erwin arrived on the scene too late, as well as a third iteration where Levi ended up saving Erwin, as a result of his mysteriously timed and unexplained hesitation, which bought just enough time for the dying commander to arrive. This leaves us with the current and final iteration of the event, during which Mikasa received a mysterious headache, pushing her to attack Levi in order to overwrite the timeline where Erwin survived. And since you probably don't believe a word of what I've just said, I am going to guide you through the chronology of these outcomes in an attempt to make sense of these soon-to-be revealed facts. As we already saw in the animated adaptation of this scene, Eren urges Levi to give Armin the Titan syringe upon realizing that his friend is still alive. For some strange, presumably subconscious reason, Levi completely ignores the urgency of the moment when he hesitates to give the syringe to Armin. Levi's hesitation continues for 3 panels during a nerve-wracking exchange between himself and Eren. This strange and conveniently timed delay allows Floch the time to arrive with Erwin, while overriding the outcome in which Levi immediately gave the syringe to Armin. Shortly after Erwin's arrival, Eren asks Levi about his hesitation, which adds nothing to the conversation other than the fact that it forces us to think for a moment about the captain's strange behavior. As per usual, the author hides the truth in plain sight by making Eren question the strange fact that Levi was somehow able to predict Erwin's arrival. While it would have been much easier to never mention such conveniences again, Isayama decided to draw a lot of our attention to Levi's strangely portrayed hesitation, which is in itself a clue to the secret nature of this scene. We cannot exactly know how the first iteration where Armin survived ended up, nor do we know what transpired during the iteration where Levi saved Erwin. All we know is that we're almost exclusively witnessing the final iteration of the story's timeline, which naturally includes a lot of the divergence points that made it possible to reach this point, and the moments discussed here simply happen to be some of the more important examples of this dynamic. Moving on with my analysis of this scene, Mikasa is cited with one of her signature headaches, which is a likely byproduct of a time travel-related déjà vu, a subconscious vision which instructed her to steer the timeline towards the survival of Armin. Mikasa Ackerman is much more than what we were made to believe, and I will address her secrets in detail during the next part. But for now, I just want to make clear that she was the only one who possessed the strength to push Levi into reassessing his initial choice to save Erwin. And whether it was for a selfish reason or not, past timeline, Eren and Mikasa weren't content with an outcome where Erwin was saved over Armin, which prompted the two to do everything they could in order to save their friend. And the rest is history. Now, before we move over to my analysis of Mikasa Ackerman's secret role, let us introduce one more clue, which will provide the final piece of evidence to the idea that there have been 4 different outcomes of this controversial event.
お前ら自分で何をやっているのか分かっているのか。
As we've all just seen, the mysterious glitch ending that was placed after the finale of the third season's first part explicitly depicts the reversal of time, before treating us to a preview of the notorious battle for the syringe. Containing not one, not two, but 3 rewinds, Season 3's glitch ending takes us to the exact moment where Mikasa steered the timeline towards Armin's survival, when she prevented Levi from using the syringe on Erwin. 3 rewinds make for 4 different outcomes. And to be perfectly honest, it's not even a question whether this is true or not, as there simply happen to be way too many clues that point to the existence of different iterations of this iconic event.
Willy によって座標が最悪の奴の手に渡っちまった。絶対に取り返さねえと。間違いねえ。断言できる。この世で一番それを持っちゃいけねえのはエレン、お前だ。来るんじゃねえ。てめえらぶっ殺してやる。まずい、ベルトルトを守りきれねえ。なんだ、巨人が。
As mentioned throughout some of this video's previous parts, Mikasa Ackerman is much more than what we were made to believe, and the scene we've just witnessed contains an extremely important, hidden in plain sight clue to the true nature of her role. One of the story's best kept secrets, Mikasa Ackerman is a key to the activation of Eren Jaeger's powers, and the fact that he remained in control of the Founding Titan's abilities while being out of contact with the already deceased Ymir Fritz most likely means that there is a hidden truth to this scene. This is in no way an ass pull, but a secret that was implanted into the story an entire decade ago, when Eren activated the power of the Founding Titan for a second time while being in contact with none other than Mikasa, who technically qualifies as a royal-blooded Titan when we consider the fact that she is a member of the Ackerman family, as well as the heir to her nation's throne. In a story that has misdirected its audience time and again, Mikasa's involvement during Eren's usage of the Founding Titan makes too much sense for this to remain a coincidence, and I promise to peel back the many layers of this currently unrevealed fact during the next few minutes. By the way, to those who credit Eren's prolonged control of the Founding Titan to a mere convenience, plot hole, or an example of lazy writing, the author actually drew the audience's attention to it again, even though he could have shied away from it easily. Pointed out by Armin, Eren remained in control of the Founding Titan during the Survey Corps' entire way back to Wall Rose, and it just so happens that Mikasa hung on to him during their retreat. further indicating the idea that there is a hidden, currently unexplained logic at play here. Within the grand plan to terminate the Titan curse, Mikasa embodies the position of a trump card who most likely possesses memories of past iterations of the timeline. And by painting her as someone with no importance at all, Eren is rendering Mikasa unsuspicious in the eyes of Ymir Fritz. And although I've refrained from talking about him for quite some time now, Karl Fritz fulfills the role of the historical figure who initiated the plan to terminate Titan powers, which makes it pretty darn interesting that it was his allegiance with Hizuru that resulted in the birth of Mikasa Ackerman. The sudden reveal of Mikasa's ancestry never amounted to a thing, but it might be that this scene was originally intended to foreshadow the fact that, after a number of failed timelines, Karl Fritz schemed to create the existence of a trump card by making a pact with the heir of another nation, which resulted in the birth of an Eldian who secretly possessed royal blood. Something as grand as the proposed plan to terminate the Titan curse is very much in need of an ace in the hole, and I believe that Mikasa's existence resulted from that necessity, and Eren is making sure to do everything he can to conceal this from Ymir Fritz. And while the story's fake ending convinced us that Eren's very first vision was nothing but a dream, we will one day learn that it was a farewell message given to him by Mikasa, moments before their past iteration selves rewinded a long overwritten, previously failed version of the future by sending memories to a previous point in time. Another clue that points into the direction of Mikasa's currently unrevealed role are her signature headaches, which were depicted for the first time during the story's second chapter. Going by the words that accompany some of Mikasa's headaches, they are a potential example of time travel-induced déjà vus. And although the fake ending convinced us that it was a byproduct of Ymir's inquiries into her mind, the exact opposite most likely happens to be the case here, since the founder must be prevented from interacting with Mikasa at all costs. And given that Mikasa was about to go after the recently abducted Eren just before receiving her second déjà vu, did it perhaps contain a vision that prevented her from repeating a past mistake? Things have gone wrong from one iteration of the timeline to the other, and regardless of the exact nature of these previously overwritten futures, past versions of Eren and Mikasa keep reassessing their plans and methods before resetting the timeline to a previous point. The ending as we know it takes place within the constraints of an inverted parody of our beloved story, and I'm willing to go as far as to say that we'll one day learn that Eren and Mikasa actually destroyed the entire world during a previous iteration of the timeline. A plot twist that would effectively subvert their actions as portrayed by the ending's repulsively uncharacteristic dream sequence. And while her current timeline version isn't conscious of this, Mikasa Ackerman is fully on board with Eren Jaeger's objective to destroy Marley, a product of necessary evil which will ultimately result in the termination of the Titan curse, and which makes as much sense for Eren as it does for the stone-cold Mikasa, who was ready to kill even her own comrades during the story's second season. Needless to say, it would be entirely in character for Mikasa to be on the same page as Eren when it comes to securing their future. These two will do anything in their power to protect one another, and I believe that their first meeting will turn out to be perfectly in parallel with their decision to destroy Marley. A plot twist that will launch the fan base into a frenzy bigger than anything we've seen before. And I'm not exactly counting out Armin to be the mastermind behind a lot of Eren and Mikasa's plans and methods. Mikasa killing the love of her life without anyone having to convince her into doing it, while the rumbling has already stopped, is more uncharacteristic than anything that's ever happened in Attack on Titan. A complete inversion of the story, which is likely going to be subverted once more when we learn the full truth of it. Mikasa Ackerman continues to live according to the wisdoms taught to her by Eren Jaeger, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they were portrayed with such obvious symmetry at the start of an arc that would seemingly tear the two apart from one another. One of Attack on Titan's biggest unsolved mysteries is the unexplained reason why Grisha gave the Attack Titan to his 9-year-old son. But I think I figured it out to a large extent. Pictured here, Eren actually mentions the part where he eats his dad to Zeke, and he does that for good reasons. Before giving the Attack Titan to his son, Grisha learned something that we aren't allowed to know about, and by making it appear as if he doesn't have anything to hide, Eren is preventing Zeke, who is in complete shock from what he has witnessed in his father's memories, from finding out about this. In other words, Eren is bluffing. While we attempt to uncover the reason why Eren is preventing his burnt-out and traumatized brother from seeing a certain memory, we must also ask ourselves why he didn't bother to reveal Carla's fate to Grisha upon being asked about it. And the answer to that is simple. Knowledge of Carla's death will unlock something crucial in Grisha, and Eren cannot allow this to happen prematurely.
Eren. 起きろ、エレン。母さんは一緒じゃないのか。
父さん、母さんが巨人に食われた。
エレン、母さんの仇を撃て。お前にはできる。行くぞ。
待て、どこへ行く？
ついてこないでくれ。
待て、お前が撃てばいいだろう、彼らの仇を。なんせお前は特別だからな。私と違ってその子も違うんじゃないのか。選ばれし者じゃないかもしれないぞ。なあ、また人に呪いをかけるのか。
この子はあんたとは違う。私の子だ。どうか頼む。関わらないでくれ。
As we've just seen, something strange unfolded the moment when a young Eren informed his father about the death of Karla. And since Grisha's wide-eyed expression is similar to the facial expressions made by his son whenever he unlocks a memory, it makes me wonder whether he saw something that triggered him to give the Attack Titan to a 9-year-old Eren. Terribly out of character, Grisha Jaeger rids himself of all of the guilt-influenced character development he experienced after cursing his first son with the burdens of vengeance, as we witness him reach a state of trance before he gives his titan to Eren. Grisha's mind went blank upon unlocking something that mysteriously prompted him to give his titan to Eren, who in turn attempted to prevent Zeke from seeing this uncharacteristic moment, since he'd be puzzled by Grisha's behavior after just having learned how much his father had grown beyond vengeance. And since we already deducted that Eren is making sure that no one finds out about the existence of previously failed iterations of the timeline, we could also make a safe guess that he's preventing Zeke from seeing Grisha's trance-like memory because it is related to the exact same secrets. The real reason why Grisha ended up giving the attack titan to his 9-year-old son is because he unlocked knowledge of a future that failed exactly because he gave it to someone else. And his final conversation with Keith will one day turn out to be a massively overlooked piece of foreshadowing. Before giving the attack titan to Eren, Grisha gave it to his friend Keith in a previously failed iteration of the timeline, which is quietly but repeatedly hinted at through a series of comparisons that make little sense when approached at face value. It's extremely strange to give the attack titan to your 9-year-old son when there's a soldier who you respect tremendously standing nearby, and despite lacking crucial knowledge of what Grisha is about to do to Eren, Keith responds to it as if he somehow knows what he's talking about. Why would Grisha respond to his friend in such a resentful and dismissive manner? Visibly annoyed by Keith's very understandable concerns, Grisha most likely resented him for his failed inheritance during a previous iteration of the timeline, because it forced him to give the attack titan to his son instead. Grisha held Keith in high esteem, suggesting that he was a chosen individual for being brave enough to go outside the walls. And after all the secret truths we've uncovered so far, it isn't at all a stretch to say that the former commander of the Survey Corps inherited the attack titan prior to Eren, during a long overwritten version of the timeline. What's more is that during Kruger's description of the attack titan's characteristics, it was none other than Keith who was depicted alongside its 3 only known inheritors, a subtle clue which will one day strengthen the idea that Isayama had every plot twist planned ages ago. Grisha was in absolute awe of Keith the first time he saw him. And since we've never received a solid answer to a question that has probably been asked thousands of times, it could very well be that Grisha gave his titan to Eren simply because he learned about a future that failed, because he gave it to someone else. For the final part of this video, I'm going to be proposing an additional number of long overwritten iterations of the story's timeline. Comparable with the iterations I've already discussed, the existence of these previously failed outcomes was hidden in plain sight by the author through overlooked clues that are going to gain new meaning at some point. Let's keep in mind that we've only been witnessing the final iteration of the story's timeline, while reminding ourselves of Isayama's ability to subvert the entire plot by making callbacks to hints that were inserted into the story ages ago. Following the storytelling dynamic examined throughout this video, there have likely been iterations where Mikasa was sold as a sex slave, and which were overwritten by Eren upon unlocking knowledge regarding the hideout of Mikasa's abductors, allowing him to save her long before Grisha's arrival at the cabin. As well as iterations where Eren didn't go rogue, which led to the genocide of Paradis due to a lack of action, prompting the main trio to reset the timeline after cooking up a strategy where Eren would distance himself from his comrades in order to fuel the conflict required to save the island. Iterations that failed because Marley's warriors came too prepared, possibly overwritten by Karl Fritz when he commanded Ymir to dig a hole for herself below the exact spot where the warriors would set up their camp 60 years later, effectively robbing them of one of their titans. Iterations where Eren was eaten because Ymir didn't receive a vision of Historia while on her way to Marley with Reiner and Bertolt, which allowed them to outrun the Survey Corps with ease, instead of making a turn to steal Historia. Multiple iterations where Reiner died, which were overwritten at least 3 times by instructing inheritors of the Jaw Titan to sacrifice their lives for him, likely because he has some sort of a role to fulfill within the plan to terminate Titan powers. Iterations that fell short because Eren saved Sasha, resulting in trajectories where the seemingly important Falco didn't get to inherit the Jaw Titan as a result of Niccolo's vengeance, which prompted Eren to refrain from sending himself knowledge of Sasha's fate. Iterations that failed because Eren didn't gain enough resolve as a result of preventing the death of Karla, forcefully leaving his mom to her fate during subsequent loops because he and Mikasa knew that it would fuel the anger required to bring this conflict to an end. Iterations where Trost was destroyed completely, which led Karl Fritz to place a conveniently sized boulder inside of the district decades before the actual attack, in order to create the means for humanity's first victory over the Titans. A whole bunch of iterations that keep resulting in the tragic deaths of Eren's friends, which have been foreshadowed as early as Grisha's time travel-infused speech from the very first season, as well as trajectories where Gabi didn't get to shoot Eren because Zeke summoned his titans immediately, a detail that was overwritten by our protagonist when he urged his brother to wait, in order to tweak the battle's conclusion to his own benefits by allowing himself to get shot in the neck, ultimately resulting in the body of a gigantic titan that remained separated from his main body. Even though I have more to tell you, this is the end for now. Feel free to like this video so that it can reach as many people as possible. Thank you for watching, and maybe until next time. A fellow fan of Attack on Titan.